Have you ever imagined turning someone who caused you pain in the past into your best friend? It seems impossible, doesn't it? But that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. This isn't just another story of war or reunions. It's a story about forgiveness, reconciliation, and how invisible scars can become bridges to something much greater. When a soldier returns from war, he doesn't just bring medals or souvenirs. He often carries a weight on his chest that no one sees, an internal battlefield that remains active even after the shooting has stopped. Have you ever been through something like this? When the past insists on knocking on your door, reminding you of everything that happened? Then stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover now may surprise you. Imagine spending years harboring feelings of anger, pain, and resentment toward a person who was, in some way, responsible for one of the worst moments of your life. Every memory acts as a trigger. Every memory brings back the sound of chaos, the smell of gunpowder, the bitter taste of fear. It's as if the war never ended. This is the reality for many veterans, who struggle daily with trauma, nightmares, and a seemingly endless loneliness. But what if one day fate brought you face to face with this figure from your past? What would you do? Would you run away? Would you confront them? Or would you have the courage to listen to what they have to say? That's how it all began for the character in this story. An ordinary day, a routine, and suddenly life decides to throw a wrench in your path. That familiar voice echoed behind me, and in an instant I felt my body freeze. My heart raced. My breath became shallow, and for a second it felt like I was back on the battlefield. Nothing prepares you for this kind of encounter. It's the kind of moment that silences everything around you and brings you face to face with what you've tried to bury for so long. The most surprising thing is that sometimes these encounters don't happen to reopen wounds, but to begin a healing process. But at first, no one notices. The first reaction is rejection. It's hard to believe that anything good could come from that shock. What would you do if you had the chance to talk to someone you once called your enemy? Look into their eyes, feel the weight of the past, and decide right then and there, in the heat of emotion, whether to remain stuck in everything that happened or give a chance for something new to begin. The truth is, forgiveness is an act of courage. And it's not a button you flip. It's a process, a choice made every day. And this story proves that even the greatest enemies can become allies when there's a willingness to take the first step. Perhaps you're remembering someone right now, someone who still holds space in your mind and heart. What if this story is the push you need to look at your own past differently? Stay with me until the end, because what follows will show that even the deepest scars can become signs of hope. The encounter that seemed impossible turned into something no one could have predicted, and that's when everything begins to change. And you know what makes all this even more special? When stories like this don't just stay on screen, but become a meeting point for those who also carry their own struggles. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. It could be a memory, a thought that came to mind, or even an experience you've had that resembles what I'm sharing. Each comment is an opportunity to show that no one needs to go through these moments alone, and you never know who your words might reach. And if you feel like this message resonates with you in some way, like this video, it's a simple yet powerful gesture. Every like helps this story reach others who might need a sign not to give up. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and continue following stories like this, which inspire, challenge, and remind us that there is hope, even in the darkest places. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear this kind of message. So write in the comments, leave your like and subscribe, because what comes next will show how this unexpected encounter was just the beginning of a transformation that no one imagined. I never thought I could look at him without feeling angry. Every memory of the battlefield still burned in my mind, as if the war had never truly ended. In the United States, for many veterans, returning home feels like just the beginning of another fight. A silent fight far from the trenches but waged every day inside their own heads. The war ends on the calendar but continues in the mind. The city streets seem normal to anyone else, but for those who were there, every loud sound can become a trigger. Every crowd can spark anxiety, and every unfamiliar face can feel like a threat. It was in this constant state of alert that I lived, as if the battlefield were just steps away, invisible to the rest of the world. I still remembered the smell of dust mixed with gunpowder, the deafening roar of helicopters, and the weight of the vest on my body. Amidst it all, there were faces I would never forget, and his was one of them. He had been my enemy, someone who represented everything I wanted to forget. Each time that memory surfaced, my body reacted as if I were the 20-something soldier again, my heart racing and my breath caught in my chest. It was as if anger had become part of who I was. The hardest thing to explain is that, even after years, these memories don't lose their power. On the contrary, sometimes they seem to become even clearer. Many don't understand what it's like to carry this weight. The world moves on, people return to work, to parties, to Sunday barbecues, and they expect you to do the same. But how can you smile again when inside you're still stuck there? That's how my life unfolded for years, until the day fate decided to put that man back in my path. The encounter didn't happen in an extraordinary place. It wasn't at a ceremony, nor at a special event. It happened in the most ordinary of settings, a line at a coffee shop on any given morning on the corner of a busy street. I was distracted, fiddling with my phone, trying to maintain my Tuesday routine, when I heard a voice I knew. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. My body recognized it before my mind did. I felt my stomach churn, my breath catch, and for an instant, everything around me disappeared. I was back there, that day again, in that place. In that moment, 1,000 things ran through my mind. Part of me wanted to run away, avoid the confrontation. Another part wanted to finally say everything I'd been holding back for years. And it was in this whirlwind of thoughts that I realized something I'd never admitted to myself. I was tired of carrying that weight. Living with anger consumes an absurd amount of energy. It's like being tied to a chain that you hold tightly to yourself. And the hidden truth no one told me is that forgiving, or at least opening yourself up to listening, is less about the other person and more about yourself. But it wasn't simple. When I finally summoned the courage to look at him, I saw that the years had also left their mark on him. He was no longer the person I remembered. His eyes seemed to carry stories of their own, and there was a weariness in his face that made me hesitate. For the first time, I didn't just see the enemy. I saw a person, and that, I confess, was disconcerting. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was at that moment that one of the most difficult, and at the same time, most liberating journeys of my life began. It wasn't just about forgiving someone, but about changing an entire mindset, about breaking patterns I'd carried since the war. It's amazing how the decisions we make in these moments can define the course of everything that follows. Sometimes transformation begins in the most unlikely place, and the truth is, it almost always requires courage. Looking into the eyes of the one who was once your greatest fear, and choosing not to repeat the cycle of hatred, is one of the most revolutionary choices anyone can make. This process wasn't quick, nor was it easy. Each encounter felt like walking through minefields, filled with memories, conflicting emotions, and a tension that only those who've experienced something similar can understand. But with each conversation, something shifted within me. Small revelations emerged, not just about him, but about myself. I began to realize that my identity didn't need to be tied to what happened in the past, and that maybe, just maybe, that encounter had a greater purpose than I could have imagined. Comment: I also want to free myself, just so I know you're with me on this journey of facing the past and transforming pain into strength. Sometimes the pain doesn't scream. It whispers in the silence of the early morning. I remember how many nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, reliving every second of what happened there. My body lay still, but my mind remained alert, as if the next shot could come at any moment. It's strange to explain to someone who's never been through it. You're back home in the United States in a safe room, but your heart beats as if you're in the middle of the desert, hearing footsteps approaching. People think the greatest weight of war is on the battlefield, but the true weight begins when you return and realize the battlefield is within you. It was difficult to cope with everyday life. Noises that had previously been mere ordinary sounds now made me shudder. A door slamming sounded like a grenade exploding. A car suddenly accelerating made my body prepare to run. It's a kind of invisible prison, where every memory is a cell, and every trigger throws you back to the worst day of your life. I carried feelings of revenge that burned like embers, an almost irrational desire to collect a debt the world seemed to owe. This feeling consumed me, turning me into a person I didn't want to be. And at the same time, it gave me the false sense of being in control, when in fact I was trapped. Many veterans here face the same battle. Some lose themselves in alcohol, some seek numbness in medication, or some work long hours, trying not to think. But none of this erases the images that return when the house grows quiet. I knew I needed a way out, but I didn't know where to begin. It's like being in the middle of a dark maze, feeling the walls, unsure if there really is an exit out there. And the more you try to escape these memories, the more they haunt you. It was during this period that I began to feel the real impact of the invisible scars. They didn't appear in the mirror, but they were everywhere, in my harsh responses, in my difficulty connecting with people, in my fear of trusting anyone again. It was as if I had built a wall around myself to protect myself, but that same wall isolated me from everything that could heal me. And when I thought of him, of that face that symbolized all the suffering I'd experienced, the anger grew again, reminding me that the wall was there, firm and heavy. There were days when I believed I would never be able to move on, that my life would always be divided between before and after the war. I saw families laughing together in parks, parents playing with their children, and I felt a lump in my throat. It was as if the world had moved on without me, as if I were frozen in time, watching everything through a window. It wasn't just missing what I'd lost. It was the feeling that perhaps I'd lost myself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was in the midst of this silent despair that I began to realize something no one told me in training. War leaves scars on the mind that don't erase themselves. There's no point in just waiting for time to pass because time alone doesn't heal. You need to make conscious choices, decisions that challenge the mindset war created within you. And that was the most painful part. Admitting that I needed to change, that I needed to face these memories head on, even if it meant revisiting inner places I wanted to forget forever. This was the point where I began to understand that transformation is a journey full of hidden scenes that no one sees. Each step toward facing the pain felt like a plunge into the unknown, but also an opportunity to rebuild myself. Each sleepless night became an invitation to reflect, each trigger a chance to understand where so much anger came from. Little by little, I realized that my fight was no longer against him, nor against the past, but against what the pain was transforming me into. Write in the comments, "I want to break this wall," just so I know that you also believe it's possible to transform pain into freedom. It was an ordinary day, the kind you don't expect anything special from. I'd left home early that morning, trying to follow my usual routine, drinking my coffee in the same place at the same time as if habit could give me some kind of control over my inner feelings. I walked into the neighborhood coffee shop, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sound of low conversations bringing me a strange sense of comfort. I took my place in line and stood there, distracted, scrolling through my phone without paying much attention, until I heard a voice. It wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that seemed to reach across time and pull me back to a place I swore I never wanted to be again. My body froze. It was as if the air had suddenly been taken away. My heart raced at the same rate it did when I heard gunshots in the distance. My hands began to sweat, and I felt a strange chill creep up my spine. My eyes took a few seconds to move, as if my body knew any movement would change everything. When I finally looked back, there he was. The face I'd seen so often in my nightmares. The same one I associated with pain, anger, the memories that kept me awake night after night. He looked different, older, more tired, but it was him. And in that instant, all the barriers I'd built to protect myself seemed to have been torn down. The cafeteria seemed silent. It was as if the whole world had stopped to watch what was about to happen. My body was torn between fight and flight. Part of me wanted to run away, forget I'd ever seen him. Another part wanted to go to him and say everything that had been stuck in my throat for years. Every step he took seemed to echo inside me. It was like being in slow motion, feeling every heartbeat like a war drum. When he saw me, he hesitated for a moment. There was no hiding the surprise in his eyes. And then, something happened that I hadn't expected. He smiled, a shy, almost uncertain smile, like someone unsure whether he'd be welcomed or rejected. It disarmed me. I wasn't prepared for this reaction. I expected hatred, tension, or at least a cold stare. But what I saw was something completely different, something that seemed to carry regret and a certain relief. My entire body stiffened. It took all my courage not to look away. My stomach lurched, as if my entire past had been laid out before me in a single second. It was as if all my memories of the war had found a meeting place there, in that small cafe, in front of that man. And amidst the turmoil, a question began to echo within me. Was this the moment to finally face everything that was bottled up inside me? The environment seemed to conspire for this encounter to happen. The people around me continued living their lives, but for me, time had stopped. I sensed something bigger was at stake, that this chance occurrence had a meaning far beyond coincidence. Sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be to make decisions that change the course of everything. I was facing one of those decisions. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because it was in that moment, with my heart racing and my mind in conflict, that I realized that whatever I chose to do in that instant could change my entire life. The tension was almost unbearable, but at the same time there was a strange feeling that perhaps this was the opportunity to transform an open wound into something that could, perhaps, begin to heal. Comment below. My heart raced along with it, just so I know you also felt that tension and understand what it's like to be facing a moment that can change everything. When our eyes finally met, I felt as if the ground had dropped out from under me. I couldn't move a muscle for a few seconds, caught between the instinct to turn and leave and the curiosity to know what he had to say. My entire body was on alert, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the room. Memories came flooding back, the sounds of war, the suffocating heat, the smell of smoke. For a moment all I wanted was to escape, as if running would protect me from reliving everything I'd tried to forget. But my feet felt glued to the ground. He took a step toward me, and that was enough for my body to react as if I were back on the front line. I felt my shoulders stiffen, my breath shorten, and my mind begin to plan an escape route. But when he stopped a few meters away, something unexpected happened. He didn't try to impose himself, didn't say anything aggressive, just gave an almost timid nod, as if asking permission to approach. There was something in his gaze that wasn't what I expected. There was no hatred, no challenge. There was a kind of weariness, a weight I recognized because I carried my own. It was at that moment that I realized that perhaps he was as uncomfortable as I was. This realization disarmed me a little. I was prepared to face an enemy, but what I saw before me was a man, a person who seemed as marked by the past as I was. This was a strange revelation, because it took me out of the victim role for a few seconds and put me in a new place where anger and fear mixed with something I couldn't quite identify, perhaps compassion. Even so, the urge to leave was still strong. Every fiber of my being wanted to escape, get back in the car and pretend the encounter had never happened. But there was something holding me back, an inner voice telling me that maybe I needed to hear what he had to say. It was a confusing feeling, like I was about to walk through a door that could change everything but could also hurt me again. And that tension made me realize how difficult it was to let go of control, how risky it is to make room for something new when your heart is still in defense mode. He finally spoke, and the sound of his voice was different from what I remembered. There was no arrogance, no provocation. It was calm, almost low, as if afraid of awakening a ghost from the past. He said my name and paused for a second, as if choosing each word carefully. And it was at that moment that I realized that, like me, he was also carrying the weight of that history. The way he took a deep breath, the way his gaze flickered to the ground and then back to me. Everything indicated he was nervous too. It somewhat shattered the rigid image I'd created of him over the years. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was in that brief moment, between the impulse to flee and the choice to stay, that something began to shift within me. It was as if that encounter had opened a crack in my mind, allowing me to see not only the enemy, but the person behind it. And this revelation was powerful, because it showed me that perhaps the hidden truth about my own suffering was linked to how I perceived it. Perhaps the transformation I sought began right there, facing the one I least expected to encounter. Write in the comments, I took a deep breath with you, so I know you felt this weight with me and understand what it's like to take the first step even when everything inside you wants to back away. Part of me wanted to scream, say it all at once, unleash the years of accumulated anger and hurt as if each word were a form of revenge. The other part, however, wanted something completely different. It wanted to finally free itself from this weight. It was as if two forces were fighting within me, the power of the past which kept me trapped in what had happened, and the power of a possible transformation, which called me to move forward. It was at that moment that I realized how much the decisions we make in the heat of the moment can change the course of an entire life. I was there, in the middle of a coffee shop on a random morning in the United States, and I felt like every second of silence was a choice between remaining a prisoner or opening a door I'd always kept locked. My mind tried to convince me that it would be easier to leave. After all, leaving and never returning would mean I wouldn't have to face the memories that man carried with me. But my heart beat faster, as if begging me to stay. And it was in this struggle that I began to realize a hidden truth. Running away would give me momentary relief, but staying there, listening to what he had to say, could bring something much greater, perhaps even peace. And peace was something I hadn't felt in years. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my still shaking body. The sounds around me began to return. The cafe's life resumed its rhythm. But for me, that moment was still a suspended state. He remained still, waiting for my reaction, without forcing anything. This attitude disarmed me even more. He wasn't there to fight, to relive the war. He was there because, somehow, he knew that this meeting was important to him too. This was evident in the way he held his coffee cup, his hands tense as if he too had been preparing for this day for a long time. It was then that I made the hardest decision I've made since returning home. I decided to stay. I decided to listen. I didn't know what he would say. I didn't know if he was ready to forgive or even talk, but I knew I had to take this step. I felt that if I left, I would be repeating the same cycle that had kept me trapped. The escape, the anger, the isolation. By choosing to stay, I was breaking something inside me, something that had kept me in constant survival mode. And that small choice was like opening a window in a room that had been closed for years. The silence between us lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, my voice still a little shaky, I managed to say, "Okay, I'll listen to you." The words came out almost whispered, but to me they sounded like a cry of liberation. He took a deep breath, as if those few words were the signal he'd been waiting for to begin. There was no turning back. I was about to face truths that might hurt, but could also set me free. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment I decided to listen, something shifted in my mindset. It was as if a new journey had begun right there, in the middle of the cafe, without anyone around noticing. It was the beginning of a process that no longer depended on weapons but on emotional courage, a willingness to navigate discomfort and allow wounds to begin to heal. Choosing to listen was just the first step in a journey that promised revelations and perhaps even reconciliation. Comment there. I would have stayed too, just so I know you understand how difficult but necessary it is to give a chance to hear something that can transform everything. He began slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. The first thing he said was that he, too, carried that day in his memory, and that not a night went by that he didn't think about everything that happened. His voice no longer had the harsh tone I remembered. It was almost a confession, a silent plea for me to believe in the sincerity of what I was about to hear. He spoke of the weight he'd carried over the years, of how the decisions he made in that moment had changed his life forever and haunted him even after the war ended. He said that for a long time he'd tried to convince himself that he'd only done what was necessary to survive, but that this thought never brought peace, only an even heavier silence. As he spoke, something inside me began to shift. It was as if each word knocked down, brick by brick, the wall I'd built over the years to keep him away. I still felt anger. It still hurt to remember, but at the same time I began to see the man before me differently. For the first time I realized he wasn't just the villain in my story. He was also someone who carried invisible scars, someone who also lost sleep, who also faced his own ghosts. This was a powerful revelation, because it made me understand that the suffering wasn't just mine. He too was trying to survive it all. He went on, talking about how he'd tried to start over, how he'd tried to be a good father and a good husband, but that there was always a part of him that felt indebted, as if he were still stuck on that day. He said he'd sought help, gone to veterans' support meetings, read books on forgiveness and reconciliation, trying to find a way to ease the guilt. And it was there, listening to all this, that I felt something unexpected. Empathy. It wasn't a comfortable feeling, nor something I'd planned to feel, but I couldn't ignore the fact that somehow we were more alike than I ever would have imagined. It was as if in that small space of the cafeteria were two unarmed soldiers, finally shedding the weight of the backpacks they'd carried for so long. The atmosphere, previously charged with tension, began to shift. The sound of the coffee machine returned to my ears. The buzz of conversations at the other tables became clearer, and I realized I was breathing more deeply. It was as if the air was slowly returning to me. I felt that this was the turning point, the moment when something inside me began to reorganize itself to find a new way of existing. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was at that moment that I realized that forgiveness, or at least the first step toward it, wasn't about exonerating anyone, but about freeing myself from the weight that had kept me paralyzed. It was then that I understood that empathy isn't about justifying what happened, but about seeing the other person as a human being who also suffered, who also has a complex history, full of difficult decisions and regrets. That encounter began to show me that perhaps it was possible to rebuild something within myself, that perhaps it was possible to move forward without the past continuing to dictate every choice I made. Write in the comments, "I felt this relief," just so I know you also understand what it's like when suddenly the weight starts to feel a little lighter. I left that coffee shop with my heart less heavy, but not unscathed. Only a few words were exchanged, and yet something had been stirred inside. In the days that followed, I wavered between the urge to delete the number he'd left me and the urge to send a short, simple message that said, "Can we talk again?" It took me 2 days. I wrote, deleted, rewrote. When I finally sent it, I felt that butterflies in my stomach you get before making a huge decision. He responded within minutes, suggesting a neutral location, an open park, families strolling with children, parents preparing snacks at picnic tables, dogs running around, a common scene in the United States, where domestic life revolves around school calendars, baseball practices, and work commitments. It seemed a fitting contrast for two men trying to dismantle, piece by piece, a past that still lingered. We sat on a bench overlooking an empty field. We agreed on some rules, almost as if we were putting together an emotional survival manual. No interruptions, no political justifications, no rewriting history to better fit any narrative. I would talk about my pain, he would talk about his, and if a memory felt too heavy, we would pause, breathe, change the subject for a few minutes. This helped. In our first meetings, sentences came in short blocks, as if each word had to traverse a narrow corridor before reaching the air. There was still fear. The urge to leave returned in waves, especially when a detail of the memory flashed too clearly. But there was also something new, a discreet openness, an inner space where I could listen without getting lost. Over time, we began to talk about things outside the battlefield. He told me he worked long shifts in a workshop, that he was afraid to sleep late because dreams came heavy when his body was exhausted. I spoke of my sleepless nights, the coffee that became my companion in the wee hours, the habit of double-checking that the door was locked. We talked about music. We discovered we both resorted to the same old playlists to distract ourselves, of movies we avoided, of news we preferred not to watch. In every daily detail, there were behind-the-scenes glimpses of a trauma that wouldn't go away. And little by little, I began to perceive a hidden truth. Reconciliation isn't a single gesture. It's a sequence of small, almost invisible decisions that gradually shift from a defensive mindset to one of encounter. There were apologies, but they didn't happen like in the movies with impeccable speeches and a soundtrack. They happened in the middle of simple sentences. "I'm sorry for what that day did to you. I'm also sorry for turning you into my only villain, as if all my pain fit within you." These apologies came piecemeal, sometimes in messages sent late at night, when courage arrives along with the silence of the house. They were imperfect, but true, and each one had a real impact. It opened a window of fresh air in that inner room where, for years, I had harbored resentment like one who stores rusty tools. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because reconciliation is less about getting back to who I was, and more about allowing a new version of myself to form from what happened. At one meeting, he brought a notebook. He said he had started writing letters to himself as a practice for reorganizing his thoughts. He read a passage aloud, and I saw myself there, in words that weren't mine, but could have been. It was an unexpected revelation. I realized that while I was trying to control each memory so as not to be swallowed by it, he was already practicing a path of silent transformation, accepting to look at what hurt from a different angle. That inspired me to do the same. I began to write down what came to mind after each conversation, what triggered anger, what brought me calm, what decisions I could make to avoid returning to automatic mode. He relapsed. One late afternoon, a helicopter passed low overhead and I closed myself off. My hands trembled. My throat tightened. I responded shortly, coldly. For hours I considered canceling everything, deleting messages and putting up the wall again. He noticed and wrote, "If you want, we can take a break, but I'm here." That wasn't an excuse or a demand. It was presence. And presence is the opposite of abandonment, an antidote to the feeling of being alone with a weight no one can carry for you. That's when I understood another step in this process. Reconciliation requires patience with the behind the scenes. because it's behind the scenes that the mind relearns not to react with the same violence as always. Little by little, we began meeting in other places. A simple coffee shop, a short walk around the neighborhood, a community center where support meetings for veterans and families were held, those church halls with folding tables, where parents arrive with children, cookies, thermoses, and a shared commitment to listening. In these spaces, I observed something that always moved me. Mothers exchanging caring glances, fathers calmly explaining why the noise would be reduced, children learning to respect silence. This network, so typical of many communities in the United States, reminded me that healing also comes from the environment, from the small social structures that support those who are fragile. One Saturday, we went to the local memorial. I'd never had the courage to go. We walked slowly, first side by side, then each at their own pace. We didn't say much. There was a gravity there that demanded respect. In front of a specific name, he stopped and took off his cap. I felt my eyes well up. It wasn't about convincing anyone of anything. It was about acknowledging losses. Mine, his, and everyone's lost along the way. On the way back, the silence between us stopped being an abyss and became a shelter. Sometimes that's what happens when empathy matures. Silence changes function. Another afternoon, we agreed on something simple. Each of us would share a difficult memory, and at the end, say aloud what we wanted to take from that memory into our lives going forward. I said I wanted to bring vigilance without paranoia, courage without harshness. He said he wanted to bring responsibility without self-hatred, memory without eternal punishment. These small phrases, laid out on the table like putting tools back in their proper places, produced discrete revelations. It was like installing a new hinge on the door of the past. It still opens, but it no longer falls on our heads. We also chose practical rituals to support our decisions. Taking a deep breath before responding, a 5-minute pause when the conversation started to take on a hurtful tone. I arrived safely, messages after more intense encounters. It may seem small, but even a little bit can dismantle trains of thought that previously passed unchecked. This is how our mindset reorganizes itself, with small gestures that point toward a life broader than the trauma. The hidden truth is that reconciliation is a matter of engineering details. I won't romanticize it. There were days when everything seemed to recede. A misplaced comment, a misread look, a bad night that made everything more sensitive. But even then, something had changed. Instead of turning the stumble into a sentence, we treated it as a stage in the journey. Today was tough, can we try again next week? And we did. There was a commitment to continuity, not perfection. This more than any speech taught my body that peace isn't the total absence of noise. It's learning to regulate the volume. As the months passed, our meetings stopped being just about the past and began to touch on the present in new ways. We talked about work, bills to pay, noisy neighbors, those little domestic wars that parents and families experience in everyday American life, traffic when picking up the kids, homework, school meetings, the eternal negotiation between time, energy, and presence. And without realizing it, our conversation left the realm of who we were and entered the realm of who we are choosing to be now. It was then that I understood the true impact of this series of encounters. Without warning, the other person stopped occupying the position of threat in my mind and began to exist as someone with whom I could build something, even if it was just the ability to disagree without breaking down inside. Ultimately, reconciliation retaught me how to inhabit the ordinary world. The barista who already knows your order, the cashier who asks about your day, the old habit of sweeping the sidewalk on a Saturday morning. The extraordinary, I realized, isn't in grand gestures, but in maintaining the decision day after day, not to return to the trenches when my heart sinks. And the more I practiced this constancy, the more the wall separating me from life lost its height. I remained vigilant, of course. Those who've been through what I've been through rarely let up their vigilance. But attention doesn't have to be synonymous with harshness. It can become care. It can become a bridge. At the end of one of these meetings, late in the evening, he said he felt different too. Not lighter exactly, more whole. I understood. Lightness sometimes takes time. Wholeness, when it comes, is like straightening out furniture after a move. Nothing is perfect, but you already recognize the house. From then on, it became easier to plan future conversations, suggest topics, even joke about things that would have been previously unthinkable. We laughed about something silly at a food truck, commented on a game on TV at a bar. Those banal moments that, so normal, are signs that life is moving again. And, silently, a friendship as yet unnamed began to rest on our shoulders, like a coat someone puts on when they realize you're cold. Write in the comments, "Building bridges," just so I know you also believe that step by step you can transform what seemed impossible into something living, breathing, ready for what comes next. As time passed, something began to shift quietly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. It wasn't just meetings to reminisce or apologize. There was something new happening there. We began sharing small, everyday victories, like exchanging quick messages just to remind each other that the world keeps turning. I remember one night waking up from a nightmare, and instead of being alone in that spiral of memories, I sent a short message. "It's been tough today." He responded in less than 5 minutes. I couldn't sleep either. "Let's try to breathe together." It was the first time in years I'd been able to fall back asleep after a nightmare. That simple exchange was one of the first signs that something inside me was finding a new place to rest. We started scheduling meetings that went beyond heavy conversations. Sometimes it was just for coffee, a walk around the neighborhood, or watching a soccer game at the park where parents gathered to watch their kids practice. These moments, so common in the lives of many American families, became a silent training ground for us, learning to live without the constant tension. He invited me to a community barbecue at the church he attended. I hesitated, but I ended up going. It was strange at first, seeing families gathered together, kids playing with water guns, mothers preparing salads and desserts at those long picnic tables. But at the same time, there was something therapeutic in seeing normalcy happening around me, as if I could, little by little, be a part of it again. One of those afternoons, we had an idea that would forever shift the weight of the past, visiting the memorial together. It was something I'd avoided for years. Just thinking about the place made my chest tighten. But when he suggested it, I realized maybe it was time to face it, and that I wouldn't have to do it alone. On the appointed day, the sky was clear, the wind was light, and the air felt different, almost solemn. We walked side by side, in silence, until we reached the name I'd always dreaded facing. I stopped in front of him, and I felt the tears well up uncontrollably. Beside me, he took off his cap and stood there with me, saying nothing. There was no need to say anything. We stayed like that for several minutes, and for the first time, I felt that place no longer crush me. On the contrary, it was as if it had given me back something I'd lost, a sense of belonging. That scene was the definitive turning point. We left, feeling like we had symbolically buried a cycle that had held us captive. On the way back, we spoke little, but what we did say was important. He told me that there were also names engraved in that place that haunted him at night. He said he had never gone alone because he didn't have the courage to face all that without support. I understood perfectly what he meant, and somehow I felt honored to have been the person by his side that day. After that visit, our encounters became more relaxed. We began to support each other in practical ways, exchanging therapy tips, books that helped reorganize our thoughts, even playlists we used to keep our minds focused on the hardest days. There were days when we'd call each other just to laugh about something insignificant, and that, in itself, was a victory. The friendship that blossomed there wasn't planned, wasn't forced. It simply formed through perseverance, through the decision to stay and continue building a bridge where before there was only a chasm. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it was in this process that I realized how powerful a healing tool friendship can be. It was no longer just about forgiving or understanding the past, but about choosing, together, a new kind of future. Each conversation was a chance to train my brain not to fall back into the same pattern of fear and anger. Each encounter was a reminder that I didn't have to face my triggers alone, and little by little, I realized I no longer thought of him as the enemy. He had become someone I respected, someone who had seen the worst of me and still chosen to stay. This journey has been full of small, invisible victories. The first time I managed to walk into a crowded restaurant without feeling my body freeze. The first night I slept 8 hours straight. The first holiday I managed to attend a family gathering without leaving early to get some air. For many of these milestones, he was there. Not to be the hero of my story, but to bear witness to it. And that made all the difference. There's something powerful about having someone who understands the inner workings of your mind, who knows the cost of every step that seems simple to others. It's curious to think that the person I once considered the embodiment of my pain was now one of the few with whom I could be completely honest. I didn't need to filter my words. I didn't need to explain the silences. He understood, and that's rare. I realized that the unlikely friendship that formed between us didn't erase the past, but transformed its meaning. It stopped being an anchor dragging me down and became a foundation on which I could build something new. Write in the comments, "Friendship heals." Just so I know you also believe that when two people choose to support each other, even the most difficult past can be transformed into a starting point. Sometimes what we need most to heal is to look into the eyes of our past and reach out. This was the greatest revelation of this entire journey, realizing that there's no magic button that erases the pain, no quick fix that restores peace. What exists is the daily choice to not run away, not hide, and to face head-on what we've tried to avoid for so long. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and it requires more courage than any battle I've ever faced on the battlefield. But it's also liberating. Realizing that the past no longer needs to control every decision you make is like opening the window of a dark room and seeing the sun shining in for the first time in years. This story showed me that true strength lies not in toughness, but in the ability to be vulnerable. I spent years trying to prove to myself that I was strong, that I could carry all the weight left by war alone. But I only found relief when I allowed someone else to be part of the process, even if that person was the last person I would have imagined by my side. It's strange to think that someone who once represented everything I feared most is now someone with whom I share small victories, someone who understands my silences, someone who reminds me that life doesn't have to be just about survival, but also about growth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this experience taught me that reconciliation is not just an act of compassion toward the other, but a gift we give ourselves. Every conversation, every encounter, every revisited memory showed me that there is a space within us that only opens when we choose to forgive. I'm not talking about forgetting, nor pretending nothing happened, but about giving new meaning to what happened. It's transforming memories into learning, pain into fuel for something better. This shift in mindset is what allows the past to stop being an enemy and start being a silent master. When I look back, I see that this journey was full of behind-the-scenes moments no one sees. The nights of doubt, the emotional setbacks, the moments when I almost gave up, but it was also full of revelations. I discovered that peace doesn't come ready-made. It's built gradually in the way we choose to respond to triggers, in the way we retell our own story to ourselves. I discovered that it's possible to laugh again, to trust again, to plan for the future, without feeling like it'll be an eternal repetition of the past. And perhaps most importantly, I discovered that I don't have to do this alone. This reflection is a reminder that even when it seems impossible, even when everything inside you screams not to try, there's still a chance to rewrite what comes next. Maybe you're experiencing something similar right now. Perhaps there's someone you avoid, a memory you lock away, a fear that still paralyzes your steps. And maybe this is your opportunity to take a deep breath, open the door, and take the first step toward transforming this weight into something meaningful. Write in the comments, "My past doesn't define me," just so I know you're also ready to reframe your own scars and give new meaning to your story. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you in some way, and that says a lot about the connection we've created today. So take this opportunity and subscribe to the channel to continue walking with me in these conversations that go deep and help us look within. Also leave a like, because it shows that this content resonated and helps keep this space alive for others who need to hear this kind of message. And so I know you were here until the very end. Write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." I'd love to know who stayed with me throughout this entire journey. And you don't have to stop there. There's a video right here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this reflection. Click and continue with me there, because our conversation is just beginning.